presentation today is called FERPA Plus, and we're going to cover a variety of aspects of the FERPA regulations and information, including what FERPA as an acronym means. So we'll get started. He said, and then couldn't figure out how to do it. Okay. Our vice provost starts off with FERPA frustrations. So I said, we'll start off with that as well. Many of you have already got access to MyZoo or other systems on campus where student information is available. So you've already taken some kind of training, probably the one in MyLearn, to talk about what our responsibilities are with student data and sharing it. And sometimes it can be challenging. And I think the registrar wanted to make sure that everybody understands, even though we have limitations because of FERPA, that there's good reason for them, and it gives us more opportunities than it takes away. We can share information when we need to, and we have boundaries that are pretty clearly defined and can help us in difficult situations, because we can say, explain why we cannot provide information about students and help with the circumstances we're facing. Now, FERPA has been around for a very long time. It is a constantly evolving regulation and lots of legal interpretations. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to pretend I understand all the legal nuances. They have a manual, and looks like the NCAA regulation book. It's bigger than a phone book for you people who are old enough to remember what a phone book is. The privacy concerns, and she uses the word dichotomy of concerns about what's public and what's private, and the expectations and how that's changed over the past generation. When this was developed and initiated in the 1970s, the concerns were much more for the purpose of allowing students to have access to their data and their information, because it was held as property of the institution. People who are more educated than me about history, this was a lot about the late 60s, early 70s, I want to say hippies. I said people who were more empowered at a younger age than maybe their predecessors were, and had more interest in their own information, their own responsibilities, their own ownership of that data. So that's kind of where this came from. Well, come along now here for 50 years later, basically, and our concerns about our private information isn't so much about getting access, but who is getting access to our personal information. Where is it going? The technology has changed everything in student records, student information systems, and all of our jobs, and everybody who works in higher education knows how interconnected the technology is now. So that is one of the differences in the environment that she was alluding to here. And then, of course, the parental involvement. This isn't so much new. This is probably the last 25, 30 years in my career. The parents are very involved in their students. They're encouraged to be in all through their primary and elementary and secondary school, to be involved parents and to basically study right alongside with the students and make sure things get done, and be an active partner. And then when they come to college, they find that expectation is different, and that's a difficult transition. So parental involvement, they still want to be involved with their students and clear up into graduate school and professional schools. I still get calls from parents for people who are in medical school. It's like, really? The person's going to be a doctor. It's like, can't they take care of this for themselves? But no, they want, they need help. And the fact, that none of us can deny is college is an extremely expensive investment. And there is a mechanism or a reaction, that's not the right word, said an expectation of certain response, and that we may be seen more as providers, that we've been paid to do a job, and that they're the customers, and the customer's always right, and we should be, we should acquiesce to their requests, and sometimes that causes conflict. And then obviously just getting through college is very complex. Even in my lifetime, things on learning how to take care of things. And as we are now trying to navigate through all this technology, just figuring out how things work and who you need to check with and how I can get assistance isn't always really clear because there's a lot of different complexities. So let's talk about the basics. So you can all see, and I'm going to try to refrain from reading since you all can read just fine. And this is what the acronym FERPA is about, Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act of 1974. So again, as we just discussed, the idea of this was to provide access to educational records to allow students to inspect and even give them the opportunity to review and put in, follow, at least they can have existing guidelines to let people appeal or amend their records if they felt it was unfair or incorrect or inaccurate. Similar parallel, which is not student record, but something that always I come up in my mind when I hear this is your fair credit reporting. You know, if you have a credit bureau, they have to let you see your records and they have to allow you to put things in your record or to correct inaccuracies if you feel that your credit record is inaccurate. This is similar, but for educational records, and this predates the credit reports by a long time, but kind of the same idea. This is a good piece, and this is a frequent question, frequent for new people that are new to higher ed and new to Mizzou. So when does this regulation take effect? So at Mizzou, in particular, we'll talk about it, but basically, as soon as a student is matriculated at MU, the educational rights to those records and their data becomes the student's responsibility and the student's, not the parent. So it doesn't matter if you're not, I'm only 17 when I start college, or sometimes even 16 once in a while, then they're minors in the, you know, in contracts and everything else. The fact of the matter is FERPA still covers them. They're still the student's educational records. The term matriculation at MU is interpreted to be enrolled in a class, even if school hasn't started yet. So if it's summer and they've gone through summer welcome and they've enrolled, and then the parents call and want to know stuff about their classes before school starts, they have to have permission, even if school hasn't quite started yet. They've matriculated. This is a common question every summer. Educational records, what does that mean? Basically, the broadest scope, the broadest use of the term is what we use. Anything that contains information related to the student and is maintained by the institution or a third party, because as I said, in higher ed, we have many, many partners now, including my own office. We have numerous partners who have student data, either access to it or have literally stored student data. So it doesn't matter if the information is stored at the National Student Clearinghouse. The FERPA rights that the student has as far as providing access to that remains with the institution, and that partnership covers that. In a practical matter, what are some examples of a record? And here's a list of things. A few of those are always surprising or controversial because, again, the technology makes it not seem the same. I mean, even in my career, when I first started as a graduate student back in the early 90s, I worked at a small college. The student record was literally a file in the cabinet. And we had computer records too, but it was still pretty much, here's your file, this is your information. Whereas now, not only do we not have a file, we might not even have the equipment, only equipment that your record is stored on. It could be stored on OneDrive, and Microsoft has it, you know, as it could be all kinds of places. And of course, this mentions Blackboard, which is really, we really need to update that to Canvas because we've made the transition. But there are various other learning management systems that hold student data because it shows their work. Obviously, regardless of the media, as well, I guess what we're trying to say, the medium, the rules still apply. It's still a record. That does include photographs. That's one of them that we often have questions about in the past. especially with the journalism school and the photo journalism students and taking pictures and things like that, who has to have permission from and all that. So under FERPA, there's a concept of directory and non-directory, which is not necessarily the words that they use, but information that is generally considered public and can generally be released if it's not considered harmful without the student's prior consent, and non-directory information, which has to be kept private unless they specifically provide consent. We use the words directory and non-directory. It goes back at this campus to the concept as we used to have in the residence halls, landline telephones. Up until, I don't even know, probably 10, 15 years ago, they all had telephones. And every spring, or every fall, I said spring, I meant fall, every fall, after about the first 2 weeks, everybody had their room assignments and they would publish a phone directory of students for their residence hall phones. And that's kind of where it was, the campus directory. So we kind of stuck with that term, even though that has ceased to exist many years ago. A directory and non-directory information still kind of exists. So what would be in a phone book or a phone directory versus what isn't? It is possible, and we'll discuss this here in a minute, that students can restrict all their information. They don't have to have even directory information available public facing. But if they haven't restricted it, it is. You can see examples of that now in the Outlook directory. When you look up somebody's Outlook, the properties, it'll have some basic information about the student. That's the directory information. If they have chosen to restrict it, you will not find them in the Outlook directory.
So there was a question if OneDrive is FERPA compliant.
FERPA, yes, yes. Anything that, and let me state very clearly, there are people who have jobs that are paid to take care of this, and it's not the registrar's office. It's part of the IT group's security group that does all the security contracts and security evaluations of products before we ever engage in using them. So if it's a university sponsored product like OneDrive, like Box, which is its predecessor, to understand Box is going away to be replaced by OneDrive at some point, but things like that, if it has, particularly if you have to authenticate into it, which we call shibboleth, where you put in your paw print or your user ID, paw print's the old term, user ID and your password, where you have to authenticate through the university, it is almost always assured that it is safe for basic student data. There are restrictions, there are web pages. In fact, I was reading up on it before I did this afternoon. I said just to make sure, because there are different levels of data. There is a really, really high level called, I think it's DCL4, the highest level, which should not be stored, but that's talking about biometric things, medical records, things beyond just regular student educational records that they've suggested you not. But I had a question today. We're all using Microsoft Teams now, I believe. Everybody's using that. And it has a place for file storage, so you can collaborate online through Teams, and if that was FERPA compliant. And as far as I can determine, it has been evaluated. It's a university product. You do authenticate into it every time you enter. So it, as far as I am aware, is compliant for us to store student data on there. I don't recommend it. I said it's one of those things where it's fine to use as a collaborative tool, but it is not a place for permanent storage. And I saw Joanne Luton was on one of our guests today, so I'm sure she's chomping at the bit about proper record storage. But there she is. Hi, Joanne.
I would agree. That's not something for long-term storage. It is a collaborative tool, and there may be a point in time where we delete channels and teams after certain periods of time. So, put it there, work on it, and then put it in some long-term storage place.
That's exactly right. That's it. I knew I'd throw that out there because she gives a presentation on that covers part of that topic that I attended just recently. So email is not permanent storage, regardless of if you look at mine and the fact that I'm not doing a good job on cleaning my email box out. It's only a place to collect it, not keep it. I'll work on that. So here on the screen is our directory information. This is what the university has designated as information that can be released without the student's prior consent unless they have specifically restricted it. This list is pretty static. It has been reduced over my long career here. It has less on it than it used to because expectations have changed. But basically it's things that are considered not harmful to be released. But they don't have to be released. We always use the word may. We may release that information. And some students don't want anything to be released about them without their consent. And I have lots of stories why. One of the, I'm going to say strangest, one of the most outstanding ones for many years ago, we used to share our office suite with Residential Life. And I was here working after hours, and the director of Residential Life came over to my office, which he never did. That was really unusual. And he had a student who was an international student, had decided to enroll. It was a female student who decided to enroll against her family's wishes. She was not allowed to go to college, and she decided to leave and go enroll herself in college and wanted to make sure that nobody knew she was here. So she would invoke FERPA to restrict that. So if anybody inquired about her, we would not automatically recognize that she was a student here. So that was an extreme example. It was made an impression in my mind. You know, most people don't do it for such extreme reasons. So if you choose to do this as a student and restrict your information, all the information is restricted. There's an icon for us in student system in MyZoo. I know maybe not all of you are, but there's an icon that we'll show here in a minute that tells you automatically, hey, this person has this special restriction. We don't release any information. If somebody calls here, we say we have no information to share about that individual. We will not even confirm that they are existing at the university. And the student can do this, turn this on and off at their choosing in MyZoo. This is something they're empowered to go in and make changes, adjustments as needed. The icon that we were looking for is the one there is circled in blue. It is the old-fashioned little window shade. If you see a window shade, we know that person has restricted their directory information, and we shouldn't release anything about them. We should, this is with a screen that the student checks and unchecks incidentally. It just tells them what to expect. And this is if you bring it up in MyZoo, this is the script we've put in there to say, you know, I have no information, just to remind people what to say when they're on the phone. Because it could be kind of, you know, stressful. But I'm their mom and I haven't heard from them for 2 weeks or 3 months. I don't know where they are. Which I've literally had that phone call as like, you know, we don't know if my student's alive or dead, or they said we just trying to figure out where they're at. And it's like, I have no information about that person. There is an in-between setting, of course. Because it is pretty extreme. The students who don't want to have their information show up in that Outlook directory, as I was speaking about, you know, when you go and look up to button and it brings up the directory and you type it in, they can restrict the information and disappear out of there, but it doesn't put the Windows shade full restriction on there. So the ways that students can give us permission to release their non-directory information, there can be a FERPA release form developed, and they can grant access so we can talk to their person that they want us to speak with. They can also, if they have someone that they like, the parents, they want to give access to, they can go into thing called additional authorized access. We just call it AAA, which is very confusing with the people who have the car insurance. You can go in and set up, the student themselves can set it up and tell us who they want to have access to that information on a regular basis. It also gives them other things. AAA was actually designed for the cashier's office. So the person can give others authorized payer access in the payment oh, what was the name of it? They changed TouchNet system. They changed providers this year, TouchNet. So you can have your parents be able to log in and see your bill, make payments and that kind of thing. But they can also see some academic information as well, and also some financial aid information. And each one of those things is selectable. The student can decide what I want this authorized person to be able to see, just the bill, just the financial aid, those kind of, it's adjustable. So it's a little much. So who can I tell what? Because we're at this point in the presentation wondering if we've confused people. We may share public information that's direct with the public for directory information. I said that wrong. We may share directory information with the public. It is not a requirement. If you feel like someone's asking questions about somebody that's weird, even if it's basic information, you don't have to tell them anything. It's not required. It's an allowance to make it allowable to tell people, but it don't have to. Non-directory information, we can't tell that information to anyone except the student, anybody the student has given us permission to talk with, and other exceptions, which we will talk about here in a minute. This presentation has a lot of details in it, many of which are examples that only a few of you will ever encounter. One of which, and I saw Amy Simons was on the call earlier, I think it's about the Missouri Sunshine Law. There can be.
Sure, you call me out when it's about how it comes about to the Sunshine Law and people asking questions. I do have another one I'm going to put in chat for you though when you're done.
Sounds great.
Okay.
So the Sunshine Law basically is, and I don't even, again, pretend to be an expert in this either, but there are, it gives the opportunity for people to request records, public records. One of the things that my office wants to emphasize is they don't come to us. It's not the registrar's responsibility. Those requests, if you have anybody that comes up and says, I want to do a Sunshine request, I want these records, those go to UM system, to the custodian of records, and they will handle all the arrangements. It may be data that we need to provide from the campus, and there are offices that and people who are set up in that protocol to do that. Under the Sunshine Law, we don't have to necessarily create records that may not exist. We don't, meaning we may not have to compile and create new records. We may only be required to provide records that already exist or are easily reproduced. They're also able to charge for this service. So that's, again, something the custodian of records does. Only reason we bring it up in a general audience like this is if you have somebody who tries to invoke it, say, hey, you're a public institution and I, under the Sunshine Law, can have access to these records. That is not an argument to be having. Say, you know, we have a protocol for Sunshine Law requests, and it begins with the custodian of records, and just refer them. That's the entire reason this slide is here. Under FERPA, in the back of about 10 slides, you might remember that one of the real opportunities the regulation provides is for the student. It requires the institutions to have guidelines to provide the ability for students to inspect their records. That has almost never happened in a formal account with my career. I have had that happen a grand total of one time in almost 30 years. But it did happen. The first thing to remember is if a student comes to you and says, I want to inspect my records, and you have to do that under FERPA, is refer them to us, and don't panic and start, you know, clearing out your hard drive, because we have under the regulations 45 days to comply. The only thing that's important to remember is if there is a request, just like a legal request of any other type, don't destroy records that already exist after the request is made. That's not the time to get rid of things you should be holding on to. It's too late. That's, again, another Joanne Luton area to cover, is what you should be keeping long-term and what you shouldn't be under records retention. I dabble in that area as well, but I'm not the expert, as I said, but records retention is very important and is a related topic to FERPA. You probably would want to read up on that if you're in a position where you're maintaining student records or student data long-term.
Victor, there's a couple specific questions they wanted you to weigh in on.
Sure.
Raquel said, what if a student invoked FERPA and they participate in a specific program that asks them for a bio to put in a public-facing database? Would the person creating the database need to check in MyZoo if all students have invoked FERPA or not?
No, it's a little bit different. I said that I wouldn't go checking to see if they provided it. When you're setting up a database or providing student data, even if they provide it, there probably should be some kind of agreement ahead of time before that data is put out in a public facing area. So I would definitely have that in either an agreement, at least have it in the syllabus, something where the student has consented that says, by my participating in this class or by participating, you know, I've done this, I'm allowing my information to be provided to the public. So if the person really doesn't want it to be released or viewable, that you already have a protocol for how you would handle their participation in the class. That would be my, also check with your academic leaders. Again, that crosses into some interesting areas, but I would not rely implicitly on implied consent just because this person is enrolled in your class.
Okay, and the other question was from Amy. She's saying as a faculty member, she gets called or emailed by parents who want to set up a parent-teacher conference and then hide behind FERPA to decline that meeting because they can't tell who's waived FERPA and to whom. And she's asking for if you had any advice in that situation.
Using FERPA as a shield? Yeah, go ahead. But, and I get that. That goes back to the, you know, parents expect to be involved in college, just like they were in secondary school.
Victor, you know me too well, huh?
Yeah, that's right. I know that's also not your inclination. You do not appreciate people hiding behind regulations.
Right. I'm also coming at it from the standpoint of like for faculty, because I've noticed this in MU Connect as well, we don't have the same level of access to things such as FERPA waivers or student phone numbers or directory information that advisors or other administrators do. So it becomes kind of hard when a parent contacts me.
It does, Amy, you're right. And said, much of our protocol is built on the concept that we are working in MyZoo directly, whereas many of you are working in other platforms, Canvas and like you said, MU Connect and various other things, depending on your roles. And that is difficult. I don't want to lose track of what your actual question was. The idea was, obviously, the only place to check to see if a student has provided their consent to discuss it is in MyZoo. There really isn't any other substitute for that. You have to log into MyZoo to check to see if they provided access or permission for us to do it. This doesn't exist in the other platforms, so it does require that extra research.
Right, and the faculty center for students does not have that little window shade dealie.
I would have thought that it would.
I have never in my 10.5 years seen the window shade dealie.
Yeah, we
I can
probably
go
should
look, but I don't know that I have access to see that.
Yeah, well, we can try that out. I can set up a specific student so you can go look, because it is exceedingly rare. I mean, you know, we're talking like less than 1% of students would ever probably have this at one time. But we would want to make sure that it does exist.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. But using, you know, telling parents the truth, which is, I can't discuss your students' information without their prior consent, is the correct way to handle that. I said, even though they, depend on the parent, have a variety of reactions to that. Some of them are okay. Some are like, I'm sure he already did that. And some of them, of course, blow up in I'm paying the bills routine that you get. But I think most of the parents understand and will be reasonable. I said, and also said, you do still are reliant on MyZoo, even if we're working in other platforms. It's still the primary platform for student information. Is there any more questions, Tracy? Sorry, I can't see it with the PowerPoint up.
Raquel was clarifying that it wasn't a situation of a class, but extracurricular programming for retention support. So she does ask them if they want to be a part of the database or not.
Right. If they have been, if they've been asked if they want to participate and they agree, I suggest again that you have some sort of record about that agreement and that they are aware of what which information of theirs is going to be provided, then it would be fine because they've consented. The main thing is, and again, I'm not from legal counsel, I'm not an attorney. I would want to have for my own self, if I was that person, some place where they've checked, marked, they've provided me some kind of tangible electronic record or something that they agree to that. So they don't come back, later and say, I didn't know you were going to share this, and they're upset. That's just more of a practical matter. Okay. Here are things, non-directory. Some of these are laughable, but again, social security number. When I was back in my day, when I was a student at Missouri State, which was not even Missouri State yet, back in the 80s, our social security numbers were on our ID cards, and they posted our exam grades by our social security numbers on the wall outside the auditorium. So it's just a different world, now. We don't share photos anymore. That's not okay. We have removed gender in my career time from directory information to non-directory information. So other things that are maybe not so obvious is students' work. We cannot share the students' assignments with third parties without the students' consent. And that's come up in a variety of conversations. Again, when you're in a media type class, it can be kind of difficult. Okay. Specifically more for staff and faculty, how do you get access? You have to meet both standards for access to non-directory information. You have to be a school official, which will cover these definitions, but basically everybody on this call is a school official. And you have to have an educational need to know. That's a different concept. So if you're employed by MU, or you're a curator, or you're a contract employee like the, I don't know, the custodial staff, the auditors, that kind of thing, agent of the university for all of our third-party vendors, you're considered a school official. Just because you're a school official and you've taken the MyLearn training and passed the FERPA requirement training, and you get access to MyZoo or Canvas, where there is student information, or MU Connect and various other places, does it mean you have a legitimate educational interest to use your access to see student non-directory data? So basically, this group's old enough, I had to quit using this example for the freshmen because they don't know who I'm talking about anymore. I'm got to get a new reference point, but we all know that Brad Pitt went to, hi, Dr. Gibler, we all know Brad Pitt went to Mizzou. If you didn't, it's true. He did go to school here. He's a little bit older than I am So if you have access to MyZoo, in theory, you could go see Brad Pitt's grades. Now, the reason I use him as an example is it's not his real name. So people who are like, oh, I'm gonna look that up right now, don't, because I'm getting ready to tell you why you shouldn't. And two, you're not gonna find it anyway because that's not his real name. But the point of it is the only time that you should be looking at student data is if it's related to the student's education. Obviously, if you're doing something that requires access to their information as part of a class, if you're part of the student discipline protocols, you work for student affairs, you're part of a discipline committee, something like that. If you're providing a service to the student and their family, this goes into more like what I'm doing, what financial aid does, and missions, that kind of thing. Or if you're doing a specific task required, that's specific to your job or contract agreement. That's the only time you should be looking at student records, is the stuff that is required under these points. You can't just use it to go hunting for interesting tidbits or friends you knew, their daughter, a friend of yours knows goes to school. Let's see, she says she's having trouble in math. Well, let me go take a look at her grades. Just because you might be able to get to that That doesn't mean you can and should do that because you don't have a legitimate educational interest. And here's some examples. Is an educational need to know when a faculty member wants grades in a previous class, advisors asking questions. So I guess I'm supposed to answer these. So when a faculty member wants grades in a previous class is an open-ended question. It means, is it a previous class of their own that they taught? Then obviously they have access to that. If they want to see the grades of students who were taught in the same class in a previous semester by a different instructor, we have, it depends what specific information they want. We have a grade distribution report already on the registrar's website that goes back multiple years. So anyone, it's public, it's I can't think of the word, it's popped out of my head, but basically it's de-identified. They've taken all the student data out of there and have put in the grades distribution for the classes and the sections where anybody can look it up. So that's the answer to that one. What about when another advisor asks about a student? Well, then you're going to have to use your best judgment. So if Amy's working on with a student down in journalism, and Amy Brewer, the advisor from journalism office, calls and says, "Hey, we need to talk about Bob here. I'm curious about how he's progressing in his degree requirements, because here's what it shows on my chart, and I want to see if that matches up with what you have." That's fine, because they're working together with an educational purpose. If she's just calling Amy to say, "Hey, I heard Brad Pitt was in the journalism school, and did you know the professor that worked here when Brad Pitt was here, and what kind of deal is keeping him from graduating?" Unless Brad Pitt is actively trying to come back and get his degree, fingers crossed, he'll someday get to that. The answer is probably not. When a student applies to another institution, that really doesn't apply much to us, but there is a specific regulation in FERPA that allows us to share information with the transferring institution. So if an admission evaluator calls me and asks about the degree requirements of a course, or certain things about a student's record, I am able to tell that person the information without the student's consent.
Victor, there was another question. Is it okay to share a student's photo with a volunteer faculty member so they know who will be going to their clinic?
Wow, that's a tough one. Volunteer faculty member. I'm going to say no, because that's always the registrar answer, when I don't know, because it's safer to say no. The answer, in fact, is if you have a volunteer in your class, they are required to take FERPA training and fill out a FERPA agreement. So at that point, they should, before they ever get to your class, they should already have the training that would, like any other faculty member, basically, would allow them to be participants in the course and see student information. So the answer is, if they're providing an educational service to you and the class, and they've taken their FERPA training, you can share the photos with them. Yes. That came up in computer science about 5 years ago, about volunteer instructors that needed to make sure they were getting trained also, since they're not going through the regular HR onboarding process. Yeah, great question.
And I'm not sure if you covered it when you were talking about the sharing of assignments, but there was a question: how does sharing student assignments work if a graduate student has IRB approval for your courses?
Well, having IRB approval actually doesn't mean that you have FERPA permissions. Those are two different things. IRB will usually consult with the registrar if it is written up in the IRB request that the study is going to require student data sharing, identifiable information. They will often consult with the registrar. So it may be something that's been agreed to in the IRB, but they are not the same thing. So don't assume that if you got approved by IRB, unless that was specifically written into the proposal, that it's okay. Again, that gets better. Those are better when you have, it's better to be safe than sorry, and it's better to have student releases, consent. Sometimes that's not possible depending on the project you're doing. I understand. That's when you have to put it in with your IRB proposal. Yeah, they can get very complicated. This one isn't complicated. Do parents have any rights? They do not. But they don't want to hear it quite that way and that bluntly. We just try to encourage our students to be educated of what their ability, their right is, and that the mechanisms exist for them to provide access for their parents. And there is a way to do that. And if they choose not to do that and the parents want to press the federal case, there is another exception which we do not normally, see. But if the student is still a dependent on their parents' current year taxes, and they can demonstrate that with their tax forms, there is a provision in FERPA that would allow us to share non-director information because of the student being a dependent. We do not advertise that. That is not an environment we want to work in. We want the student and the parent to collaborate and provide us an answer that they both can live with, as opposed to being non-consensual. There is a health and safety aspect, obviously. If you think there's going to be some kind of significant risk to student self-harm or harm to others, obviously sharing information to the proper authorities is allowed under FERPA. I'm watching my time. We're just about out of time, so I want to leave a little bit of time to give us a chance for more questions. So if a student, we've shown you the window shade in my Zoom, meaning don't release information. If you see this red star that on the screen, that is a positive service indicator. That does not just mean what this slide says, indications for third-party release. It can mean a lot of different things, including third-party release. So you click on the little red star in my Zoo, and you look for the service indicator that says R3P, third-party permission, and you can see on the right-hand side there's a detail button. You click on the detail button, and it will take you into a screen that shows you the detail, which will specifically tell you the parent or not a parent, anybody that the student has given prior consent that you can release non-director information to them. How do we handle parents? Use of hypothetical situations is the best way. So I can't specifically comment on your student, but if you want to know if a student was doing poorly in my class and you were concerned about that, after talking to the student, here what I would suggest is a way to follow up. We have a tutoring service, whatever that is. You can explain answers and situations without using the specific student's data. Again, this is a student's decision. If they want to provide information, you can tell them how to contact us and get that dependence release. And also, again, back to the health and safety. If there is a health and safety, follow the health and safety protocols by the university. Just because they yell and they're demanding, that doesn't mean anything. I mean, I know that they can be quite aggressive. If you really have somebody who's threatening you, which doesn't ever happen, but if it did, obviously contacting the campus police and reporting it is the right thing to do. Step parents and spouses doesn't mean anything different than it does with a parent. They have no more rights than anybody else. They would have to have permission from the student to release any information to them. Other exceptions, I'm not going to hit this too hard. You can all read. Most of these are obscure, and you will never probably have them happen in your working careers. One of the ones that is important, again, health and safety emergency, very important. If you get a legally served subpoena, that happens to us regularly, but for the most part, they don't usually go out and try to find individual faculty members. If you're working on an accreditation with an accreditor, there are some exceptions in FERPA about data sharing for accreditation purposes. So we get that. I'm involved rarely with that, but I have helped over the years with the College of Nursing, School of Nursing. They have very I don't know, elaborate is maybe not is a wrong word, but they have a very intensive accreditation review, and we've provided data to them for that purpose in the past. What happens if there's an emergency? Well, the best thing to know about being prepared for an emergency is being prepared ahead of time. Know what to do in case somebody is in a situation of self-harm or violence. Know what you're supposed to do on the campus protocols. FERPA is not a concern at that point. Protocols are the concern. Just get in touch with their proper authorities. If a student provides you permission to release their information and it's public, does that mean it stays in the public realm and it can be released from that point on? And the answer is no. Under FERPA, that is not allowed. It is consent required every time the information is required. This is I don't know how many of you have student workers. We, of course, have a few here. Student worker records, their little personnel record that you would consider, if you consider that, is a student record. So that information is covered by FERPA. So if you have a student worker who's doing a terrible job and you write and you tell them about it and somehow you record that information, that is part of their student records and cannot be released without their consent. So, they graduate, they go on, somebody says, hey, this Amy worked for you. How did she perform for you? And you cannot tell them that she was a terrible employee and did a terrible job because it's part of their student record without her written consent. That goes hand in hand with references. Many of you are people who would be writing references for students, which is great. We don't want to discourage that. I occasionally do that myself. If you're going to comment as a faculty, as a person about their non-directory information, particularly if you're their instructor and you're talking about, Tim is great. He's going to do, I would highly recommend him for your doctoral program. He did a great research on this and his grade was great at this presentation. You need to get the student's consent, written consent that it's okay to release that information, even though you're doing it as a favor to them. If you do it just as a generic letter, person was a pleasure to have at our institution, it's probably fine without FERPA. You can write, in generalities. It's easier. You kind of just have the conversation with the student. Say, hey, if you want to write me a reference, I'm happy to do that. Tell me what this person wants to know, and if it's directory information, fine. If it's not, then say, hey, if I want to release this, I need to have some kind of consent from you saying that it's okay for me to talk about your performance information. I'm watching the clock carefully. We're at about 10 minutes left. Electronic signatures, this gets to be pretty technically involved. Can we accept electronic signatures is what this is about. Are they okay to accept as a consent from the student? This is rapidly changing and technology keeps changing it. We wrote this when we were using DocuSign, which is totally fine. The university is approved DocuSign. We had it for a while and we were fine with it, but then they started charging for it and we couldn't afford it anymore. So we quit using DocuSign. But if you have the DocuSign process, that's totally fine. If you have it built into an authenticated website where a student logs in and does some kind of consent, that usually is fine as well. The things that we get into is students provide forms from non-university areas. I'm joining the Marines as an officer. I get this one fairly regularly, and they send it to me with a non-handwritten signature. The student has electronically signed the Marine form, and then they handed it to me saying, can you provide this information? And those are the kind of ones you want to look at carefully to make sure that that they provide consent. And if you're not sure, you should ask. Just as an FYI, I've got permission for the ones that use the Office of OMB, Management, I forgot what it's called, Office of Management Bureau. I forgot the name, but the government one that there's a lot of forms for government releases that come from OMB that we can accept their digital signatures. Records, what to keep or not.
If a student calls requesting information over the phone,
yes.
How do you know it's not that it is them, or verify it's them and not, a friend or a parent who wants information? Maybe they give you a student ID, but.
That's right. I'm not sure if we covered that in here or not. not sure we do. I was like flipping down here. No, we don't. So I have another presentation where we talk about that very thing. So phone calls or email inquiries from non-university accounts, how do you respond to those? You are required, it's your responsibility to verify the identity of those people before you release information. So if they call me and well, one, sometimes we have caller ID depending on the phone you're using, like at work. So if they're a parent saying, I'm Tony the Tiger's mom, and I'm calling, and I can see her phone number, that should be recorded in that third-party release page under the service indicator. But beyond that, if it says I'm the student, I always verify that by asking a couple questions. You know, ask them for their student number, verify things in my zoo that they would only know. You could do a social security number, a date of birth. You could ask them about what classes they're enrolled in a previous semester. There's a ton of things that you could ask them. The responsibility is yours to make the inquiry, just to make sure you're not being, I forgot what the fancy word is, spoofed. Is that the right one? But anyway, that you're not being tricked. Said that, you know, it's not really somebody falsely impersonating that person. Double, triple that if it's an email. If somebody sends you an email and it says I'm this parent or I'm the student, and it's coming from, and this happens all the time, they send me something from Gmail, I can't correspond back and forth with you with non-direct information to your Gmail account. I don't know that's you. I can only communicate with you to your university email account if it's anything that's going to be specific about them. Yeah. Does that answer? You think that covered it, Tracy? Or are they more? Did I miss anything?
I'm not sure. I guess they'll let us know.
Okay, yeah. If you have a follow-up, go ahead and put it in the chat.
Okay.
So records, what to keep. Again, we're running out of time because I'm sorry, this presentation is long and I tend to dawdle. This gets into more of what the university policy is about records retention. There are rules about how long you're supposed to keep grades, how long to keep student work. All of that is already defined, and you should make yourself aware of that to know how long you can keep it. Make sure you understand how long the rules are applicable in your specific learning management system. So you're not disappointed by keeping things there and then find out that it was removed because it aged out. And make sure, double sure if you are somebody you're supervising graduate students who are they're not going to be here long term, they may be leaving at the end of the year or whatever, that you have a way to access the information that they have stored or have them turn it over to you or whatever, that it doesn't become orphaned. If you do provide information as a non-director information, especially if you do it without student consent, you should make a comment in My Zoo or some kind of record that is stored of that transaction. And don't keep things you don't need anymore. I'm going to skip a lot of this. I can provide the information. A lot of it's on our website. This is goes back to more about the IRB question earlier. If I'm doing academic research, what is my protocols and abilities and responsibilities for student data? There are widely written specific rules, covers a lot of topics that we can get into. It's usually best to provide that in your situation, as opposed to having a general conversation. Just know that the rules exist, and then once you have your particular scenario, approach with it and discuss the particulars. There are different rules depending if you're doing research for the university or if you're doing research for your career. It also matters if you're doing collaborative research with people who are not university employees. All these things have to be vetted before information will be provided. If you get subpoenaed, contact the general counsel's office at university system. That's the one that will help you with that process. This Patriot Act was after 9/11. We put that in there just because somebody's from the FBI or Homeland Security and they come and they're scary and they want student data. Doesn't mean you just have to hand it over to them, even though can be aggressive with you. The answer is they still have to get a subpoena, just like anybody else. Same thing with Solomon Act, which covers military recruiters. We provide information to military recruiters that is somewhat different than direct information that is provided under the FERPA regulations that we can do that. What happens if you violate FERPA? Okay, terrible things. So if you make a mistake and you violated FERPA, the first thing you do is turn yourself in. Let us know what happened, because we have a protocol. It usually happens when somebody sends out information erroneously through email, because it's super easy to do when you're typing out a list of people and you want to send a message to them, and you get somebody that has a similar name, but it's a different person, and they get information. Just tell us what happened. We'll try to get the email back. You can do a recall. We can have IT try to retrieve it. We'll contact the person that you sent it to, tell them, hey, throw this away. This is not for you. Then we notify the student what happened and what we've done to correct the incident and take care of it. Those are accidental releases. If a student is angry about this, about information being released, they can complain to the Department of Education. I have had that again one time. It is unpleasant when the feds call you up and ask you why there's a complaint against your office. In theory, the government can sanction us in terrible, terrible ways, including taking away our access to financial aid, which would have obviously shut us down as an institution. It's not a joke. FERPA is important, and we have to do our best to comply with and follow the directions. I already mentioned the email is the easiest way to make mistakes and release information because of that whole auto-populate that Outlook does. And if you had Stan Smith in your office or in your class this semester, but you had a different Stan Smith in there last semester, and it just picks the wrong one for you and you didn't notice, that's the kind of thing that happens. Obviously, do not send grades with email, so they can see their grades in their learning management system. And be careful what you write and what you store. This is Joanne again, because even if you aren't using it and you forgot about it, or even maybe if you delete it, it's still discoverable. So if there's some reason that the student wants to retrieve that, or there's a legal action, that information is going to be retrievable and will be used.
There's also a question, what if we get a call for information on an employee who was a student before they were hired? Can we give out current work data, but nothing about their previous student status?
That's exactly right. That's the difference between being an employee. The tricky part is in a place like us, we have so many employees who are also students at the same time. I said, so there's unless they're a student worker, which I covered that specific thing. If they're a full-time employee or a full-time, or even a part-time employee, if they are doing both roles, obviously you can talk about their personnel issue, information under the rules that are allowed by those guidelines. You should not be providing any educational records without the student's consent. And that basically goes to the bottom line here. Don't release things without the student's consent unless it's directory information. It's your responsibility to know how to do that and when to do that. Be careful. If you have questions, ask ahead of time. We have resources available to you. The registrar will help. If you have any specific FERPA questions from this meeting, feel free to send them to me and I'll be happy to reply. And I know that was a lot of information over a long period of time, so I apologize for using every last minute, but I believe that we're about out of time. Tracy, do you have anything for last second?
I think I caught everybody, but if not, go ahead and repeat the question.
Oh yeah, so I'm happy to stay on, but I don't want to make people late for the next session. I said sure. I'm fine on time, but I don't want to cause other people problems.
Yeah, I think we got it all. So
fantastic. I'm going to turn off this screen share. Okay. Well, it was fun. I haven't done that one in a while. So I appreciate everybody's sticking with me through the whole thing.
Terrific. All right. Well, thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.